Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this session today. I'm joined by Gula Mustafa and Sumaira Javed, who are both from HANS Pakistan, one of the newest members of the START network, just globally, but also in Pakistan. Since the beginning of their involvement with me particularly, HANS has had a lot of involvement for a new member. So we're going to talk through that today. My name is Leonie Leborn. I'm the country support manager for the anticipation and risk financing team at START Network. I'll explain a little bit more what that means and what we do in this team and what I've been working with Mustafa and Sumaira on over the past months. Just to give you a few house rules, there's a few house rules in the chat that Sophia posted. So we'll be mostly doing the question and answer session by chat, but if you have a burning desire to speak, then please just ask Sophia. Just to give you an idea of the format of this session, it's going to be very much a conversation. So a conversation between me, Mustafa, and Sumaira in the first half, just explaining, what it is that we're doing. And then in the second half of the hour, we're going to talk with you guys, so with the audience, with answering questions and discussing a little bit further the project and the work that Mustafa and Sumaira have been leading on in Pakistan. I hope that sounds okay to everyone. I will just launch into a little introduction, and then I'm going to hand over, and then I'm going to start asking my talk show host questions to Sumaira and Mustafa. I hope that sounds all right. So just to give you a little bit of background on the disaster risk financing work that's been happening in Pakistan. So as you probably know as well, the wider landscape of START Network's work in Pakistan involves setting up one of 5 founding hubs. And that's been happening over the last year, and we're currently in a proof of concept phase. Of course, that work started a long time before that as well. In terms of the disaster risk financing work, it began about in 2017, where when members came together in Pakistan to look at the different existing funding flows in Pakistan, humanitarian funding flows, what funding existed, when did it come in, what was it for, what kind of hazards was it for, and so on, and where the gaps were. Disaster risk financing really relies on 3 concepts, which are firstly, to understand risk, quantify risk, and set thresholds, danger levels, I guess. The second component is setting pre-agreed contingency plans. So saying, like, if this happens or if this is predicted, these are the actions we will roll out in such and such locations by such and such actors. And then finally, the third component is pre-positioned funding. So knowing that if such and such a disaster is predicted or happens, you can rely on XYZ funding to roll out that action. So that's exactly what we've been working on in Pakistan over the last few years, setting this up in partnership with many of the START Network members, obviously, not just HANS, who is front and center today. And it's a wider effort that feeds into the hub vision, the vision of the Pakistan hub, which has bigger aims than disaster risk financing. But the disaster risk financing program, I guess, helps the hub achieve its vision of more localized and proactive humanitarian action in Pakistan. So since 2017, we assessed all the hazards, as I said, and the funding flows with members in Pakistan. And out of that consultation period came 3 hazards that members wanted to focus on in the first instance. These were drought, flooding, and heat wave. And for those of you on the call who aren't based in Pakistan, roughly the seasons go like this, although with climate change, these are changing very fast, so please don't quote me. The hot period, so the heat wave season, is usually around May, June of the year. The flood season is usually like a classic monsoon kind of season. Again, this is completely changing year on year, but traditionally I will say, so June to August. And then drought, which depends which crop you look at, but for us, we're looking at winter wheat, is September till March. So as you can see, they kind of follow each other throughout the year. So this is the first year. So in 2020, we started working on this with members, as I say, identifying those priority hazards. And yeah, so working also with WHH, who has been the host of this program in country since then. So there's a question from Sarah that says, is the slide supposed to be changing? No, we actually don't have slides. Today is just a conversation. So this is just the holding slide in the background. So yeah, so as I said, WHH is the host for this program and has been facilitating all of the work that's been going on. As unbelievably, we are in October, so we've gone through the traditional heat wave season, and we've gone through the flood season, and Hans has been very active, as I say. We met a danger threshold in May this year in the heat wave season, and funding was released for early action in Karachi. And Hans was leading on that intervention alongside with support from Action Against Hunger. So that was, I guess, the first experience of DRF in Pakistan, and this was additional to all of the experience that START has in drought early action in other countries. And as I say, Hans will be talking us through a little bit of the intervention that they rolled out in Karachi as well. Then we moved on to the flood season, and the flood season was actually supposed to be an observation year only this year. So we were supposed to build the model that predicts the flood, and then just make it strong and good for next year, because this was the first flood prediction experience for START Network. Because as I say, we'd done heat wave and we'd done drought before, but we'd not done flood to this degree. And then, as you may have seen, those who are based outside of Pakistan, the flooding this year was so severe that the hub leadership group, which in Pakistan is called the National Steering Committee, requested that we activate the flood model and the flood system, which we did. And again, funding was released for action in Muzaffargarh, which is a part of Punjab in Pakistan. And Hans is also leading on that intervention. I think that's kind of the whistle-stop tour of the things that have happened this year in Pakistan. As I say, we are now nearing the end of the flood season, or we should be through it really. Just yesterday, I got a message from Sumaira saying there's a heat wave alert potentially, or at least an indication that there may be another spike in temperatures, which is very unusual for this time of year, or quite unusual, I should say. So yeah, we are learning as we go along. This has been quite the year of big learning, not only for us, START Network in Pakistan, but also I think for the hub, I hope it's okay to say, and also, of course, for Hans as one of our newest members. So that's the introduction. I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to start with my first question for Sumaira and Ghulam, which is to tell us a little bit about your involvement, your perspective of your involvement in the disaster risk financing program of START in Pakistan. I'm going to leave that quite an open question, and I'll prompt you if you need me to.
Well, thank you so much, Leonie, for the introductions and to, share the things with the group about DRF. I'll just share that since 2017, we have been involved with START network in different things. Though we were not formally the part of the network, which we became this year in May 2020, through very vigorous process that started last year to become part of the START network, and whole of the management of START, we are very obliged that they facilitated us in all this, process. But when we joined the network, we also became part of DRF, because there are so many things in the start network, and being new member, we are exploring the things as the things are coming up in our way. So being part of the DRF, we came to know that DRF is working on floods, heat waves, and droughts, and there had been certain, respective technical working groups have been devised in Pakistan for that are being chaired by some international organizations. For example, the heat wave technical working group is chaired by ACF and is co-chaired by Hans and one of the um, local NGO, Rapid, who are actually the co-chairs of this group. Concern is leading the drought technical working group, and the flood technical working group is being led by the Doaba Foundation, though it's not the member of the START network, but this is the arrangement thought by the management of START to have the learnings, and if applicable, they can, if possible, they can be replicated for the future as well. So Hand is one of the technical working co-chair of the technical working groups on heat waves that is led by the ACF. And so far, we have been involved in two types of disasters: heat waves regarding DRF, and there was also complementary funding of the start for the floods for Dadu, in which we worked in a consortium with Mercy Corps and with CWSA. That was the complementary funding from the start fund. Because this year the flood technical working group do not have that funding for the particular disasters to meet. That was the understanding while this whole arrangement was set up. And how did we get involved in it, and what attracted Hands, and what are the different things as we talk about this. Mm, Hands is actually, I'll just give a brief introduction of my organization. That Hands is basically uh, established in 1979, and it's been 40 years that we are working, and we are working both on development as well as on the humanitarian interventions. And this is the one of the largest humanitarian, emerged as one of the largest humanitarian organizations across Pakistan with respect to its geographical as well as the programmatic coverage. And Hand has its best practicing models for both of its programs for development as well as for the humanitarian side. And when we see the global scenario, talking about the localization of response, grand bargain agenda, all these things, then we think that Hands is best placed NGO in Pakistan with multi-sectoral interventions to the particular, localization thing. And we have the capacity to respond quickly because we are working with the 6,000 community-based organizations across Pakistan in 4 provinces, which is again a strength of Hands. So this thing taught us to become more proactively working with the other networks, working on the global level, international level. And the different thing for this DRF thing in for us is that it's about early action anticipation, advanced planning, funding stream is covered in different things with DRF, which made us to think more to work on it, because you can plan and you can implement in a very well and organized way while you know the things in advance. Na? So these are the things in which Hands is actually involved and doing with DRF and with the START network. Over.
Thank you, Sumera. I'm going to ask you as well, and Mustafa, if you don't mind to put your video on, you're more than welcome to show your faces if you want. But that's a really good summary, and I think to people who aren't familiar with Hands, it's a great introduction. Mustafa, did you want to add to that, or are you happy? Up to you for me to.
Yeah, I think the all aspects are covered by Sumera. So maybe I will talk later because I have to respect the time as well.
Sure, sure. Um, Great. That's a really good, like I said, great summary, and good to see where you're at. I guess I wanted to ask you about, in particular, if you're okay with that, in particular about the heat wave intervention that happened in May. What would you say? Can you talk us a little bit through the intervention itself, what was done, and what you see as kind of the successes, the challenges, and maybe the lessons learned of this intervention? Um, yeah.
Yes, Leonie, I would just give introduction of the project, like when we did this project and where we actually did this project. It was done in May to July, and it was 1.5 months project, and it was on the awareness raising through using different, mediums, through social media, through FM radio. There had been some SMS transmission, and we also provided some umbrella shades to the PDMS end, having the heat wave awareness messages printed on that with all the respective, organizations logo on it. And there were 6 areas in Karachi district. There were 6 districts which we actually had this all awareness um, with the
Awareness campaigns.
awareness campaign, and this was the dissemination of heat wave preventive messages through FM radio, and the digital video dissemination through social media using Facebook, YouTube, and videos were also shared on the WhatsApp groups as well. And there had been some SMS transmission, and 50,000 texts per day to the beneficiaries were sent for 20 days. And as I told, that provision of the umbrella shades were given to the PDMA. So these were the 4 areas of intervention for us in this project. And we targeted population, about 1 million population was the target population in 6 districts of Karachi, which includes Karachi East, Karachi West, Karachi South, Karachi Central, Malir, and Korangi, So this was the intervention districts for this project. And yes, and we later on, it was also new for us that we evaluated, or we had this gap survey of the same project. And that at that time there had been so many of the things already going on. There was raining in Karachi, there was COVID-19 situation there, the
It was the
electricity
Eid weekend.
shortages,
It was also the Eid weekend when the
Eid weekend, the holidays, that was all. And we actually, our teams were very much, into the implementation of this project. Everybody was very vigilant and were attending the things despite of the Eid holidays. So there had been lot of issues while we were doing this. No? So we actually evaluated the project, and we wanted to know what are the changes or the improvements in the knowledge, attitudes, and practices about the heat wave, or about the heat stroke prevention among the population. And we also wanted to know what are the effective mediums of communication, like in social media or the SMS, or there are some other options. So we evaluated the project on these terms as well. And while talking about the CAP survey, while talking about the knowledge, 50% we found that respondents have the appropriate knowledge regarding the heat wave, and 30% knew correctly about the signs of heat wave exhaustion and first aid regarding the heat wave. And as far as the attitudes were concerned, that we found that more than 50% respondent plan to follow more heat wave messages, and they said they will be more likely to do so if includes the forecast of the extreme heat. And as far as the practices are concerned, we found that 2/3 of the respondents fully translated and acquired the knowledge into practice, but few of the respondents were in better at taking measures to protect themselves, and they are encouraging others to protect themselves. So we also found through the survey that more around 50% of the respondents said to have this campaign before the onset of some heat wave situation, so that people are more prepared and people are more taking care of the heat wave strokes and all that stuff. And we found that the social media was the most effective medium of transmission of this knowledge, because people were at home, they were using Facebook, they were using the YouTube. uh, in Pakistan or in our society, people use FM radio while driving, and so the mobility was restricted. So the use of FM radio was not that effective as we saw the use of social media, the Facebook, the WhatsApp, and this YouTube things. So
And
these are
you were saying also it's maybe also because people were more at home, right? So they weren't like
yes,
on the road in the car listening to the radio. They were maybe
yes,
more on
Yeah,
their
that's
phone.
There's even the interesting part of this response as well, because if you consider the previous responses, the intervention we propose on the basis of previous experiences, because you know in 2015, Karachi lost more than 1,200 lives during the first heat wave in the city, and then next year, even Hands and other partners, they started to work on the awareness raising. Although we have another alarming stories of that year, that when we submitted project to a partner, it was approved after 1 month, and when the program was on ground in 2016, then this city was experiencing a windy weather, and it was very hard for us to even to hold the tents, and then some awareness raising camps were established in the city because due to the windy condition in the city. So it is another interesting story of the previous responses we did in the city. But even we propose FM radio campaign, because previously we experienced that FM is an effective tool. But COVID-19 and then heat wave both, they completely changed this context during this year, during the response of the start, because people were stuck at home and we were spending money on FM radio. That's why you see that the respondent honestly responded that they got a message mostly through social media. So it means it is again it's a point of learning that we cannot fix any learning. It depends on the context during that time. I don't know, maybe next year there will be a different context. So while selecting these type of the means of communication, we should take care of the current context in the target area. It's very important. Otherwise, we look at a lot of resources for FM because you need a least cost for disseminating the message through Facebook. I think required meager amount to boost the videos or messages if you compare with the FM. So that was interesting, I think, thing which we learned.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this year we did a lot of learnings. Like you said, Samira, it fell on the Eid weekend. So, I mean, there's many things I think that are very particular to this year, that had this like confluence of all these issues, which I think we could have not foreseen in some ways. But yeah, we've learned a lot. I think even from the start side, you know, we've learned that if there's any kind of holy weekend, we need to prepare more so that we know what we're doing when and if something happens on that weekend. I mean, I remember last year in Senegal, we received the huge payout, the $10 million payout on Christmas Day, which is always seems to be our way at start to receive these things on big holy days. So Samira, I'm sorry, I actually cut you off earlier, so I'll hand back to you.
No, it's okay. I just want to add one thing more, that as we see that due to this climate change thing, the duration and the impact of these type of disasters or the hazards are multifaceted. Like the time duration is long, as we thought previously that the heat wave would last from May to September. Now it is till mid of the October, you know, we are getting the alert for that. So we also need to take this into consideration while designing and doing the things, that the duration of the particular, you know, hazard on which we are working, that is more influenced by the climate change scenario as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're seeing that I think in more than just in Pakistan, we're seeing it repeated everywhere. Yeah, those are really interesting findings as well. And I think you were saying to me, Sumera, before this call as well, that there was like a different in receptiveness to the communication messages depending on which format that was. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that as well?
Yes, I was actually discussing the mediums. Now, people are more into the social media nowadays, you know, and using this Facebook, WhatsApp, YouTube channels. So we found it more effective medium of communication and to disseminate the information regarding the heat stroke messages as compared to others. Because as Mustafa said, the previously we had some other learnings. This time we had different learnings. We can club these things according to the situation, what's going on. This time COVID actually restricted the mobility of, you know, everybody. So we couldn't have the camps and we couldn't have you know, these type of arrangements through which we also disseminate the awareness raising messages in the camp. And there are certain protocols to set up those camps. We remember that we did with
And you
Oxfam.
were also saying to me, sorry, Samir, to cut you off, that like the different gendered reception of messaging depending
Oh,
on the,
yes.
right?
Yes, we found that men were more receptive because in our society, men are more proactive in handling the calls and all these things. And plus, second thing is that women are basically more into the home chores and all these stuff. But when we see the ratio of using this social media thing, we found that men have received more messages as compared to women. But when we see the women ratio as compared to men, they were also acquiring all this knowledge from the social media, from Facebook, from YouTube, and from other WhatsApp groups. And overall, the finding of all these mediums were more towards these social um,
More like modern ways of
channels. And yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much. No, that's great.
Even I would contribute into this type of the means. Likewise, in this year, we discussed with the start and the ACF was part of that. That rather than publication of thousands and thousands of brochures, uh, we have seen the use of brochures after dissemination. So we spend that money on the installation of umbrellas, on the traffic police points in the city. Mostly people are waiting for traffic signals and these things. So it was really effective to build the image, number one. Number two, disseminate message. And it was a purposeful that you are securing to the police officer who's standing at the point to serve the people during these type of the heat waves in hot days, because they don't have such type of arrangements by the government. So ideally, if we plan something, there should be somehow the other we can say attributes of the interventions as well. So in this case, I think it was an effective way that we provided these type of umbrellas for traffic police, and I think the purpose was that to disseminate messages. Uh, so it was really effective way.
Yeah, thank you, Mustafa. That's a great addition. Yeah, that was a key component of the proposal as well from your side. Yeah. I guess my next question is kind of a double question, which is, Hans is one of the newest members of the START network in general. So I guess maybe I'll break down the question in one by one. So you're one of the newest members, and I assume and I hope and I know that there's been challenges not only in you being a new member, but also in you being a local member. I wonder if you could talk us a little bit through. I imagine that there are other people on the call who are also new members, also maybe local members in other countries. And I think they would benefit from hearing maybe the lessons learned or the things that you think you've already identified we can do differently next year in order to make working with members like you easier and streamlined and so on. I'll leave either of you to answer.
So this time, should I take lead, Sumera? Yeah. Yeah, I think we have a lot of the
Sure.
a lot of the positive stories for this type of the arrangement of DRF and the approach adopted by the STAR network. But yes, obviously, as a new member, this was a full of learning. I think the sector, the major thing which we learned and we were concerned about previously, it was about the somehow the power sharing within the sector. I think it's a great challenge, particularly in case of the implementation of the agenda of localization. So I think it's everywhere. Power sharing it's not a common thing. It's not an easy job. So we realize that we have got some space once we are part of this whole process formally. Then at least our voice is now getting some space and in different power structures and power corridors of the sector. Because our senior colleague, I'm sure initially I saw that he was there. Ahmad is there. He's a aggressive, we can say, campaign of this type of discourse, and this
Yes,
is
I would
definitely,
think so.
yeah, that it's not easy cookies that you are getting some space in this type of the these structures. So at least we are part of the this humanitarian arrangements architecture at the national scale as a local actor. And previously we found that mostly we did it as a like an implementing partner rather than any part of any decision making at the national level. So that's a positive side of this type of the membership and then participation in this huge setup of a start. Uh, I think we are facing some limitations, some issues, some challenges, and we should deal honestly with each other. That we should minimize in the future because Hands is experiencing. I think we are partnering in 3 programs, including 2 DRF and the different restart funds. Uh, because some the legal hitches at the national level, we decided that we will go through the international partners rather than direct access to the start funds or any type of the arrangement. But we realized that because the real, we can say, essence of this approach was the proactiveness. Likewise, the availability of funds within 72 hours. It's I never observed it anywhere. That's a great criticism on this whole sector. That once emergency over, then we enter because we required some lengthy process, administrative process. You apply for, you go for proposal submission, then approval process, then fund transfer. It took months and months, and then you are in field. Emergency over. That's why there's a great criticism on this emergency sector in Pakistan, particularly. I think even the government also respond immediately. Some religious faith-based organizations, they reach immediately because of their flexibility of the implementation of modalities and resources. So there was a gray area, and there was a great even criticism on the existing arrangement whatsoever we have in the country. Likewise, the standby arrangements. We have few standby arrangements with different partners, but they fail to reach on time. In this case, because Hands has a certain arrangement, likewise we have some pool funds available within the Hands. We are getting some grants from the provincial government. That's why we have some the backup of resources, which we can get in case of an emergency. But I think if you see the arrangement of financial arrangement between the lead partner and then the implementing partner, it's point of serious concern. I don't know when the small CSOs will be taking part into this process, how they will manage. Likewise, once the project was approved, it is agreed that we have to land these activities within 24 hours at the field. So you require money. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not saying, the money is slipping in the accounts of the lead partner, the implementing partner who's on the ground. I think in our case, at least, I think we got money after 1 month, I think maybe more than 1 month. So that's a gray area that you can discuss that how we can minimize these type of financial arrangements, because this is the niche of this model, that you are ensuring the approvals. That's the first thing that's already happening. It's really a great experience we have, that how we got timely approval and then even facilitation while the development of proposal. That's the one part is covered. But the second part, you should, I think, consider that how you can improve further. And this is a learning for the new partner if they are interested in to take part in the start arrangements. Then I think this is very important.
Sure. Thanks, Minister. Just to explain to people on the call who maybe are not as involved as maybe Ahmad and Saeed, for example. So 2 things that Mustafa mentioned. One is the complementarity of Start Fund with DRF. So just so you know, there was also a Start Fund alert in Pakistan for flooding. And the way we see it moving forward is really that, you know, hazards that aren't as predictable. So in our eyes, for example, flash flooding, or things that can't be as modeled, if you will, there still is the Start Fund, and the Start Fund should still be used for this kind of thing, and also, of course, for response, because DRF is focused on early action. So we very much see that complementarity, and something that we will be kind of looking into at the end of the flooding season, if it ever ends, is this idea that, you know, we can kind of use the different funding mechanisms, whether it's DRF or Start Fund, in a complementary way to ensure that different versions of one hazard, so flash flooding, riverine flooding, canal flooding, etc., is kind of covered by all the different types of structures that we have. And then just to clarify the other point that Mustafa makes, part of the structure that we set up this year as kind of a test structure in the first year was to buddy up local NGOs with INGOs for funding, and such as the DRF, because this was a new program, these were new members, but also we didn't have the contracting kind of structures in place to make funding flow more directly, say from start directly to hands. So that's something we're also working on for the future, because as Mustafa says, it's quite diametrically opposed to the direction that we want to be going in terms of localization and more streamlined funding flows that really shift the power. So that's something we're prioritizing and looking into for the next year, because it needs a lot of work, and this way we have set up is very much a workaround for this year, for 2020, for our pilot year. So yeah, just to for those on the line who aren't based in Pakistan, those are but they're very real challenges, and we need to work on them, and between the risk seasons is exactly the right time to be working on that, and actors like Hans should be absolutely front and center of that discussion, because you're the most impacted by them, as you say. If the funds are sleeping in someone else's accounts, then you can't get cracking. I have the final question, and then I'm going to open the floor for discussion. So if I can just have a small, maybe a 1-minute reply from you, Mustafa, which is about the hub. Like, how do you see this program and this work feeding into the wider vision of the hub in Pakistan? And I know there are lots of hub people on the call too, so I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I think this is again the positive development. I think we are moving in the right direction as a sector. So credit goes to the lead, the guys and the ladies and gentlemen who are involved in this whole process, particularly the establishment of hub. I think the first thing is that, as Sumera said, that the different working groups, they are developing the trigger mechanism. That's I think the knowledge which will contribute into the overall national level hub of the start at the Pakistan level. So this type of the information will contribute in a future operationalization of the hub. Number one. Number two, different the implementation modalities we are doing now, and different best practicing models we are doing now in the several learnings we discussed earlier. So I think this whole knowledge will contribute and will lead towards the establishment of hub. And yes, although I'm sure there are still challenges. Some, as I said, that it's not easy to challenge the existing power structure and these arrangements. It will take time. It needs some the appetite at both sides, at the local actors and then international actors as well. Because when you are going to develop some synergies, then you have to accept the group dynamics, so I'm sure I'm really optimistic and hopeful that we are leading towards the establishment of hub, because this whole knowledge will feed into the operationalization of Pakistan hub. Yeah.
Thanks, Mustafa. That's great. That's wonderful. I hope so too, by the way. And I think, like you say, not without challenges. I'm going to open the floor for questions. I know it takes a few minutes for people to type in their questions, so please feel free to start, dear participants. And I will read them out to you, Mustafa and Sumera, and I will kind of try and make sense of them. I hope that's okay. So yeah, everyone feel free to ask any questions. I think some things we kind of glanced over, we didn't talk about in as much detail, and that's okay, that's normal. We can't do everything in 30 minutes, and I know we already went over time. So we have 20 minutes now for questions. Feel free to ask anything about what we mentioned. Sophia, am I also expecting questions through other platforms or just through this chat? Okay, fine. Great. I will wait on here. Oh my gosh, there are a lot of people. This is really overwhelming. I should not have looked. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of you have questions, so don't hold back. They can be simple. They can be like, you haven't talked much about flood. Why haven't you talked about that? And I can tell you that it's because it was only activated last month. So we don't have the findings in the same way that we do for heat wave, or I say we, I speak like I'm
No,
already
but
at hand. Sorry, Mustafa.
yeah, but even for floods, we can discuss. Likewise, I think that was my previous point I raised, that's a critical, I think, critic on this sector, that we always go and feel after months of the disasters, and when something is washed away. But in this case, likewise, of the floods in Muzaffargarh, I think we were there on time when the petitions were there, and then and definitely areas hit by the floods. But because we responded proactively, that's the beauty of this whole arrangement of DRF, that we saved the livestock, humans, and then even the assets when the teams were there under this program. So again, I think this type of the proactive approach, it's proven. I think the team of the lead organization like Care, I think they are in field from this week, and they are discussing with the people that, and then the responses from the people, they said that always we were getting support after the when some everything was washed. It was the first time when the organizations are with us. Yes, government was involved just in announcements, and then the information dissemination that we leave the place. But where we should go, it was not even informed by the government, and how we can survive if we leave the places. But in this case, when the livelihood support was there, some backup of medical care and then livestock care was there, so it was not hard for people to even manage this type of the predicted emergency in the area. So I think further, definitely we'll be waiting for some detailed analysis from the field after the completion of the program. But I think I'm getting positive stories from field regarding the flood intervention in Punjab.
Great. Thank you so much, Mustafa. That's encouraging as a first glimpse. Yes, and then we have a question actually for you, Sumira, which relates to your point earlier about the gendered perception of messaging, from Poppy. She says, we have found in other locations that men can sometimes end up as gatekeepers to this type of knowledge, with the impact being that the knowledge doesn't trickle down to women if men are the ones receiving the info. In regards to, have you found, I guess the question is, have you found the same in your programming? You find that gatekeeper?
Well, thank you so much, Poppy and Leonie, for translating the message. We actually found that men were more responsive than the women, as I shared earlier. And there are definitely power dynamics in our society. We cannot, deny that as well. And we also found that we were actually disseminating the messages on the heat wave prevention. But there had been some suggestions and recommendations from the respondents as well, that we should have added some advice or guidelines how to disseminate this message with your family and with your peers as well. There should have been some information on that as well. So yes, we do recognize that there are things, and this is being dominated by the men, but in our messages, in our all the awareness campaigns, we also need to advise people how to disseminate this information, because we are just saying these are the things to do, and these are do's and don'ts, but we don't convey them how should we disseminate this message further. This is very right question, and there should have been some advice attached to that. When you advise somebody, then this is being more disseminated to the audience in a
It's
well
true, and
manner.
I think I remember looking through the findings with you a few weeks back, and I remember there was one thing, like for women, word of mouth was really effective, right, compared to other mediums. So I guess in the future, that's something that can be looked into. Maybe that's a way of communicating to ensure that the messaging does get to women, like through, I don't know, women's networks and things like that.
Yes, you're right, but we assume that one person disseminate the information to 7 more persons. This is what we assume while we are working with the people in dissemination of the messages. So yes, because this is also a learning from our perspective as well, and for the DRF as well. So next time while we will be doing this, we will be taking this into consideration. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumira. That's great. We have a question from Haroon, which I think might be a question for me and maybe Mustafa. How do you see this type of modeling working towards dealing with the likes of COVID/pandemics, which may become a common reality going forward? I guess I can try and answer on the global side, and maybe then after I will hand to you, Mustafa, for the Pakistan side. For us, of course, we're looking into other hazards, in the risk financing and anticipation team. So we're looking at other locations where perhaps disease outbreaks might be something really worth modeling, not just COVID, but other types of disease too. So we've had experiences through the START fund, through the anticipation element of the START fund, with disease being a secondary threat, secondary impact of flooding, for example. So setting up potentially like a triggered or secondary trigger system where if you have flooding, you automatically can release funding for a cholera, for example, cholera prevention campaign. And that's something that has been done in the past, I believe in Malawi and in other places as well. Or I remember at the beginning of Ebola, in the last wave of it, there was also a response element on one side of a border and a anticipation on another side of the border. I believe it was Congo and Uganda. So there are a lot of things that, even if you can't model the disease itself, that we think we can probably look into for modeling like secondary impacts of certain disease outbreaks. So yeah, on the global sphere, we're looking into this, and then, but of course, I guess your question is also about COVID and how it impacts our work generally. And there's many sessions during the assembly on the COVID fund specifically that start set up as well. So keep an eye out for that. And now I hand over to you, Mustafa, for the Pakistan side of this question.
Yeah, thank you, Leon. I think you elaborated well. I just contribute one part of this type of the modeling. I think we learned from the existing COVID emergency, particularly in Pakistan. We realized that most of the actors were dealing with the COVID as a health emergency. Although it is a health emergency, and we cannot deny from that aspect. But we also observe that the huge impact on the economic side, and then protection, psychosocial care. So it means each pandemic will definitely impact on these aspects of the life as well, where the humanitarian needs arise, and then world has their own priorities. So in this case, I think at least you rightly mentioned that we can do some modeling, because we don't know in future that which type of the pandemic we will be facing, because COVID, nobody was aware about even that we will be facing the COVID-19 type of the pandemic. So in general, yes, I think we should go with the at least modeling for the secondary impacts of the any pandemics, like as I mentioned, that economic impact, and then even the other part like the protection, and I mentioned the psychosocial care. And it's doable, because we have a lot of learning from the COVID-19 responses. So it is doable. But yeah, over.
I think we can always be ambitious. Thanks, Haroon, for the question. I'm not seeing any more questions, and be careful because I can talk. So anyone, oh, here we go, Anna. It would be interesting to explain the process we went through to prepare the contingency plans ahead of the triggers. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm happy to talk about that. I think Hans maybe were less involved in this, and that's something to work on for next time as well, especially now that they've been involved in almost everything we do. But yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, Anna, actually. The idea, so everyone on the call, the idea was obviously to have pre-agreed contingency or like project proposals, ready to go. Who's doing what, where, if this and this is predicted in this and this area. But the idea, that was the idea. And then because it was a new way of, we were setting this all up, it was a new way of working. We were in the process of hiring Amjad, who's also on the call, who's our DRF coordinator in country. All these things got delayed, and we got to the point where the model triggered, or the model met the thresholds, and we didn't have those contingency plans in place. We did have a decision of already who would be leading in those regions if they triggered, but we didn't know the activities. So there was I guess a kind of open proposal development process that was very similar to the START Fund at that point. We took the best practice from the START Fund and kind of replicated those. But obviously in future, we want to save even more time and act even quicker where possible. And therefore we want those plans to be agreed in advance. And we did want that for 2020, but you know, life is different from theory. So, so yeah, and then the same actually happened for flood, unfortunately, because as I said at the beginning, the flood model wasn't going to be ready until 2021. And then because of the severe flooding, there was a change of course on that. But as a result, of course, the contingency plans weren't ready as well. So we took, again, the best practice from the START Fund, which shows that, for me anyway, it shows that START Fund is key to what we do. It's where we build our experience, and it's always, you know, it's such a fountain of knowledge and source of information, not just for me personally and the team who was working on developing the templates for all of this and the reporting formats and the communication, but also, of course, for, you know, the types of activities, the learnings we have from others, and so on. I'll stop there because we have just a few minutes and a few questions from Sarfraz. Not a question, just a comment. Hans is working hard and I appreciate their struggle. Believe me, me too. It's my first experience in Start Network Assembly. I learned a lot. Thanks very much, Sarfraz. Yeah, I think this is a session really that showcases that, you know, what we're doing is really not perfect. We're learning hard and sometimes what we do is not right. And I think sometimes we have to be recalibrated and redirected. Recently, we had a very intense and deep discussion with the flood technical working group that was about localization and how we create models that perhaps are not in touch with local reality. So we're also thinking about that. And for next season, how we can put local voices and experiences at the front and center of what we do. DRF remains a type of work that is triggered through objective scientific predictions and decision making, but where possible, we want to make it as you know, tailored and responsive to local lived realities as well. So that's, I mean, when I think about all the things that we have to improve, I think how much work we have, but I think we can only make this better by working to make the system better. There's some a question here from Karimi. How do you manage or plan for when predictions don't happen and communities and other stakeholders mobilized or are activated to stop people ignoring the next time? And also a comment from Suzanne Plus, direct to local organization. Yeah, I guess I'll read this out because I think Mustafa and Sumera, you'll have some thoughts, and maybe that'll be our last question. How do you manage or plan for when predictions don't happen and communities are mobilized or plans are activated, and how do you stop people ignoring it the next time? I'll let you speak.
Yeah, I think as far as the recent experiences, we have two interventions, one with the flood and the other was heat wave. And I don't know, should I say fortunately or unfortunately, we never experienced such situation. But even in case of the heat waves, as Sumera and Leona mentioned, that even we launched that campaign in May, but it was not expected in October. Still, we are facing the repeated number of challenges with the heat wave. So, but ideally, you rightly mentioned that we should have a plan and written, like a pop-up strategy that in that scenario, how we manage the communities That's the area you have highlighted. I think that should be part of the maybe in future proposal writing. That at least there should be in a written form that how we will act if there's something is not meeting any the criteria or the situation which was predicted in the proposal, but it is slightly pointed out.
And I just want to add one thing that while working with this DRF thing, things are actually, we are predicting, but sometimes unpredictable things happens because this time Start Fund does not have the funds for the floods, but there had been a flood response through the Start Fund. Sorry, DRF did not have the fund for the floods, but we managed it through a Start funding, and that was not predictable, and that was responded. So these are the things we need to have, both predictable and unpredictable things, and we are also working on the models as well, which we will be disseminating with the working groups, and the models for these heat waves, floods, and droughts, that will help us more to understand the situation, what are the predictable things and what are not. So this is also there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sumera. Yeah, and Karimi, I guess our global experience of this is also quite strong. Sometimes, of course, predictions don't happen as it's a prediction, it's a forecast, there's uncertainty. And the way I look at the participant list, and I see some colleagues from the anticipation team, and the way we kind of manage this risk is often by suggesting to our members to look into low regrets actions is what they're called. So actions that either target the most vulnerable anyway, or aren't pre-positioning something that can't be used, for example, for another reason, or lugging stocks of kits, for example, to the wrong part of the country, but rather doing more like distribution points that are like focal nodes. There's quite a few ways to manage that risk or that uncertainty, I should say. And yeah, we call that low regrets. And I think the Red Cross also has very similar approach to low regrets or no regrets actions. And like you say, a lot of the low regrets actions are also focused on preparedness, so that people, have that knowledge and that awareness either for this season or for next season, next year. So yeah, we try and reduce that kind of acting in vain as much as possible. Oi, Claire, I hope this is not a question. I was just about to wrap up. On the managing the uncertainty, we have two ways to manage this. First, we have a monitor at country level, which has more data sources from the local level to help us cross-reference and flex to the reality. We also, in our plans, will look at different routes, so contingency plans for the actions on the crisis. But if it doesn't happen, then perhaps those funds can be used for longer-term resilience or recalled. So yeah, we have different avenues. And we can flex within the operating framework. Yeah, absolutely. So we need to look, we have this experience globally, but also we can look at in each case-by-case scenario how it works best for the Pakistani context and for the specific crisis that we're looking at. And like Sumera and Mustafa said earlier, some years you have Eid that joins with COVID, that joins with heat wave, and then you have another heat wave again in the year. Every year and every experience is different, but yeah, we can definitely manage the uncertainty in a variety of different ways. And we should look to do that more and more. I'm gonna wrap us up because there's only 1 minute left, but I just wanted to say, first of all, a huge thank you to Mustafa and Sumera, who gave so much of their time, not just for this call, but for the floods, for the heat waves, on the phone with me at all hours, and also just so much energy and good practice that you share. So thank you so much for that. Thanks to the people who've asked questions. They've been really, really good. And you know where to find us if you find more questions to ask us later. And also just to say, this is all new, even for us. Sometimes we don't know the answers. Sometimes we find out as we go along. And this is the first multi-hazard DRF system anywhere. So we're going to be taking lots and lots of learning for this. Also for the START financing facility, which is another session at the assembly, which you should join if you're interested in seeing how all these different national systems fit together at global level seamlessly, I hope. Emily, if you're on the line, I'm looking at you, no pressure. Thank you so much. And thank you, Sophia, for the support.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
very
much.
Great day.
Take care.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.